My secretary accused me of being the father of her child. My family believed her and my wife filed for divorce, even though I was innocent. I always thought my life was pretty simple. Good job, great friends, and a girlfriend named Jessica whom I loved. Everything felt steady and predictable, until that one fateful afternoon when I received a message that turned my world upside down. It was a random Tuesday, and I was at work, deep in my routine, when my phone buzzed. I glanced at the screen, expecting a text from Jessica or one of my buddies. Instead, it was Alex, the younger sister of my friend Mason. I'd known Mason and his family for years, and while Alex and I weren't exactly close, we hung out when our group got together. There was never anything romantic between us, so seeing her name flash on my screen sent a chill down my spine. Her message was simple yet alarming. "Can we talk? It's really important." First, I brushed it off. Maybe she needed help with something. I replied, "Sure. What's up?" But her next message sent a jolt of unease through me. "It's not something I can discuss over text. Can you meet me later today?" My gut twisted. What could be so urgent? The rest of the day dragged on, a heavy weight in my stomach as I tried to focus. I arrived at the cafe at 5 p.m. and spotted Alex in the corner, nervously stirring her coffee. She looked stressed, and the sight made my heart race. I approached her, sat down, and said, "Hey Alex, what's going on?" Without any preamble, she locked eyes with me and said, "I'm pregnant. And it's yours." For a solid 10 seconds, I thought I must be dreaming. There was no way she had just said what I thought she did. My mind raced, unable to process the words as they hung in the air like a loaded gun. "I'm pregnant, and you're the father," she repeated, her voice steady, as if she hadn't just detonated a nuclear bomb in my life. I felt an absurd urge to laugh, thinking it had to be a cruel joke. But her expression was unyielding. She was dead serious. "Alex, that's impossible. We've never." My voice trailed off as reality crashed down on me. She cut me off, her face morphing from nervousness to anger. "Are you really going to pretend it didn't happen? It was that night after Mason's birthday party. You were drunk and so was I. You don't remember." I was paralyzed, my thoughts spiraling. Mason's party had been about 2 months ago. I remembered drinking, but not like she described. I was sure I hadn't blacked out or made a mistake. I definitely hadn't slept with Alex. "No, Alex, that didn't happen," I shouted, desperation creeping into my voice. "I left early with Jessica." She shook her head, her eyes blazing. "You left with me, not her. You were too drunk to remember." Panic surged through me. This was insane. How could she accuse me of something so monstrous? I hadn't cheated on Jessica, and I absolutely hadn't gotten Alex pregnant. "Look, you're wrong. I'm sorry you're dealing with this, but I'm not the father. You must have slept with someone else." My voice cracked as I tried to reason with her. Her fury was palpable, rising like a storm. "How can you say that? You're just going to abandon me and your child." Heat flooded my face as I fought to keep my composure. This was beyond belief. "Alex, I'm telling you the truth. I did not sleep with you. If you're convinced I'm the father, then get a test or something. A paternity test will prove I'm not lying." I shot back, desperation clawing at my throat. For a fleeting moment, I thought Alex might reconsider. But then she hit me with something that completely knocked me off balance. "I don't need a paternity test. I know it's you. What do you mean you don't need one?" I snapped, frustration boiling over. "Alex, that's how this works. A paternity test will clear this whole mess up." She crossed her arms defiantly, shaking her head like a stubborn child. "I don't trust those tests. They can be wrong. I know it's you." My heart raced as confusion morphed into pure rage. How could she be so utterly irrational? What was she expecting me to do? Just roll over and accept this madness? I wasn't about to take the fall for something I hadn't done. I stood up abruptly, shoving my chair back. "I'm done with this conversation, Alex. Take the test and we can talk. Until then, leave me the hell alone." She shot up too, her face a storm of anger. "You're such a coward. I always thought you were a good guy, but you're just like every other jerk." "Fine. I'll raise this baby on my own. But don't come crawling back when you realize the truth. I stormed out of the cafe, my mind racing and my heart pounding. I didn't know how to feel. Part of me was furious, but another part was terrified. What if she truly believed this? What if she told Mason or other people? This could obliterate my reputation and destroy my relationship with Jessica. I jumped into my car and immediately called Mason. He picked up on the second ring. Hey man, what's up? Mason, we need to talk. It's about your sister. A heavy pause settled over the line. Alex? What about her? I inhaled sharply. She just told me she's pregnant and claims I'm the father. Silence echoed on the other end before Mason spoke again, his voice low and cautious. What exactly do you mean? What I said. She says I slept with her after your birthday party and got her pregnant. I swear to God, Mason, it's not true. Nothing happened between us. I could hear him breathing, each inhale filled with disbelief and tension. Finally, he said, she never mentioned you, just that she's pregnant. I don't know what to say. His words hit me like a gut punch. He wasn't outright accusing me, but the doubt seeped through his tone. My best friend wasn't sure if he could trust me. I swear, Mason, I didn't do this. I'm going to demand she takes a paternity test. He sighed, resignation lacing his words. Yeah, maybe that's the best way to settle this. But man, if it's true, I don't know what I'll do. I'll talk to her, I said, dread pooling in my stomach as I hung up. This wasn't just some wild accusation. It could spiral into a living nightmare if Mason or anyone else started to believe her. When I got home to Jessica that night, a wave of guilt washed over me. Part of me considered keeping this nightmare a secret, but deep down, I knew I couldn't hide something so explosive. Jessica was sitting on the couch when I walked in, her eyes glued to her phone. She looked up, smiling. Hey, how was your day? I felt the weight of the world pressing down on me, unsure of how to begin. I stood in the doorway, hands shoved deep in my pockets, and simply said, we need to talk. Her smile vanished in an instant. She sat up straighter, concern etched across her face. What's wrong? I took a deep breath and sank down across from her, my heart racing like a drum in my chest. Something happened today, and you're not going to like it. But I need you to know right away that I didn't do anything wrong. Jessica's eyes narrowed with suspicion. What are you talking about? I exhaled, feeling the weight of my words. I explained everything. How Alex had accused me of being the father of her baby, how I had vehemently denied it, and how she refused to take a paternity test. I recounted every detail, every exact word Alex had thrown at me. By the time I finished, Jessica's face had gone pale, her expression a mixture of disbelief and confusion. She stared at me, stunned, mouth slightly agape. Finally, she whispered, "Are you serious? You got her pregnant?" "No, but it's not true, I swear," I pleaded, desperation creeping into my voice. "I never touched her. She's either making this up or she's confused. I don't know why, but nothing happened." Silence hung heavy in the air as she processed what I had just told her. Then she stood up abruptly, striding toward the kitchen. I could feel the tension thickening, like a storm brewing overhead. She opened the fridge, grabbed a bottle of water, and took a long drink. When she finally turned back to me, her face was hard, almost unyielding. "Do you know how crazy this sounds?" "I know it does. But I swear to you, I didn't do anything." She stared at me for a long moment, her gaze piercing. Why would she lie? That was the question I dreaded most, the question I couldn't answer. The days following Alex's accusations felt like I was trapped in a waking nightmare. No matter how much I tried to explain, it felt like no one was really listening. Jessica hadn't left me, but there was a palpable distance growing between us, as if she were second-guessing everything I said. It felt like I had to prove my innocence over and over again, even though I had been telling the truth from the start. Then things took a turn for the worse when my parents got involved. It all started with a phone call from my mom on a Sunday morning. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing as I thought about how I had managed to avoid Mason's calls for the past couple of days. I knew I couldn't dodge him forever, but I wasn't ready to face those awkward conversations just yet. That's when my phone rang. It was my mom. I swiped to answer, trying to sound casual, but the pit in my stomach tightened as I heard the tension in her voice. "We need to talk, Liam. I just spoke to Alex." I sat up immediately, my heart pounding. "What do you mean you've spoken to Alex? I haven't even told you about this situation yet." "How did you know?" "She called me," my mom replied, her voice laced with concern. "She told me everything. Everything." My mom's voice was thick with disappointment, dripping with that familiar tone that made me feel like a child caught in a horrific lie. "Mom, listen. None of this is true. I didn't do anything with her." But she wasn't hearing me. "Liam, we raised you better than this. How could you do this to her, to your own child?" A chill shot through me. She had completely swallowed Alex's story. "Mom, please. There is no child. I didn't sleep with her. She's either wrong or lying. I don't know which. But you can't just believe her without any proof." "Proof?" My mom snapped, her voice laced with fury. "You don't need proof when a girl comes forward and claims you're the father of her baby. That's all the proof we need." I was incredulous. My own mother was refusing to even consider my side. "Mom, she's refused to take a paternity test. Doesn't that mean anything to you?" But her resolve was unshakable. "Liam, paternity tests can be inaccurate or manipulated. We've known Alex for years. She's a good girl. She wouldn't lie about something like this." Frustration surged through me, and my hands balled into fists. "Mom, I'm telling you the truth. Nothing happened between us. Your father and I think it's time you take responsibility," she continued, her words cutting deeper than any knife. "You've made a mistake, and now it's time to fix it." In that moment, it hit me like a freight train. They weren't going to listen. They had made their decision, and no amount of pleading would change that. "Mom, I didn't make a mistake because I didn't do anything. She's lying." My voice trembled with rage. A heavy silence fell over the room before she finally replied, her tone chilling. "You need to come over. We're having a family meeting. Your father and I need to talk about what comes next." My heart sank into my stomach. I knew this was going to be a disaster, but I had no choice. I agreed to meet them later that afternoon. Later that day, I pulled up to my parents' house, dread hanging over me like a dark cloud. I hadn't even told Jessica where I was going. She'd been suspicious of me for days, and I just didn't have the energy to deal with her questions. As I stepped through the front door, I was greeted by the familiar, comforting scent of my mom's cooking. Normally, that aroma would soothe me, but today it felt like I was walking into a trap. My dad sat at the kitchen table, his face set in a stony glare, arms crossed like a fortress. My mom stood at the stove, her back turned to me, the tension in the room suffocating. An uncomfortable silence hung in the air as I stepped inside. "Sit down, Liam," my dad said, his voice cold and devoid of warmth. I sank into the chair across from him, feeling like a child about to be reprimanded for breaking some unspoken rule. But this was more than a childish mistake. It was about my future, my reputation, and the crushing weight of a lie that wasn't mine. "This is serious, Liam." My dad's voice cut through the air like a knife, heavy with disapproval as he leaned forward, his expression a thundercloud of anger. "We've talked to Alex, and we've decided it's time you step up and be a man about this." "Dad, I didn't do anything," I protested, desperation clawing at my throat. "Alex is lying. She won't even take a paternity test. Doesn't that tell you something?" "Let me finish." He cut me off, his tone sharpening like a blade. "You've made a mess, and now it's your responsibility to clean it up. We're not going to let you run away from this. If you don't take care of that child, you're no son of mine." Felt like a physical blow, leaving me breathless. "What do you mean, you're threatening to disown me?" My dad leaned in, his eyes burning with fury. "Yes, if you don't take responsibility for that child, you are not part of this family anymore. Your mother and I won't tolerate this kind of behavior. You either step up, or you're out." I was in shock. They were willing to sever ties over something that hadn't even happened. "Dad, you can't be serious." Believe me, I am, he snapped, his voice echoing in the room. You're making a choice right now. I felt rage boil inside me, every muscle in my body tense. Well, you're wrong, I shouted, standing up from the table, my chair scraping loudly against the floor. How can you believe her over me? I'm your son. My dad stood up too, his face inches from mine, a wall of anger. Because we raised you better than this, Liam, and I don't care what you say. You will do what's right, or you can find somewhere else to live. I was shaking, the fury and betrayal mixing like fire and ice in my veins. You know what? I could barely control my voice, trembling with outrage. If you want to believe her over me, fine, but I'm not going to admit to something I didn't do. And I'm not going to be blackmailed into taking responsibility for a child that isn't mine. My dad's expression hardened, his jaw clenched. Then you're out. Pack your things and go. If you won't be a man about this, you're not welcome here anymore. I stared at him, disbelief flooding my mind. They were serious. Actually gonna kick me out over this? I turned to my mom, searching for any sign of support, any glimmer of understanding. But she just looked away, avoiding my gaze, and that betrayal cut deeper than any knife. Without another word, I turned on my heel and stormed out of the house, slamming the door behind me with a force that echoed my turmoil. I drove back to my apartment in a daze, my mind racing like a runaway train. How could my own parents do this to me? How could they believe Alex's lies so easily? The weight of the situation pressed down on me, suffocating. Jessica wasn't talking to me, Mason had been avoiding me, and now my own parents had turned their backs. I was completely alone. That night, I sat in my apartment, staring blankly at my phone. I thought about calling Jessica, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. The tension between us had thickened to the point where I doubted she'd even pick up. And if she did, what could I say? That my own parents had disowned me? That no one believed me? That I was losing everything? So I sat in silence, letting the darkness creep in as my thoughts spiraled out of control. How had my life fallen apart so quickly? Just weeks ago, everything had felt normal. Now it was a wreck, and I kept replaying the conversation with my parents in my mind, trying to comprehend how they could side with Alex so easily. How could they turn their backs on me without even giving me a chance to prove my innocence? Their betrayal gnawed at me. Maybe they had never truly trusted me. Maybe they had been waiting for me to screw up, and this was their excuse to finally cut me loose. I knew I had to act. I couldn't let Alex's lies destroy my life. I needed to find a way to prove that I wasn't the father, that I wasn't responsible for her baby. Then, like a light bulb going off in my mind, the answer came to me. I needed to talk to Alex again. She was the only one who could clear this up. If I could get her to admit the truth, everything would be set right. This was my only option. I grabbed my jacket and keys and stormed out the door, determination coursing through my veins. I was going to confront Alex once and for all. Arriving at Alex's apartment building, my heart pounded like a drum. I had no idea what I was going to say or how I would get her to admit the truth, but I had to try. I couldn't let her lies ruin my life any further. I knocked on the door, and after a few moments, it swung open. Alex stood there, surprise flooding her features. "Liam, what are you doing here?" she asked, her voice trembling. Without waiting for an invitation, I stepped inside, a storm brewing inside me. "We need to talk." She closed the door behind me, crossing her arms defensively. "About what?" "About the baby," I said, my voice steely. "About this lie you're spreading." Her eyes blazed with anger. "It's not a lie. You're the father, and you know it." I shook my head, trying to keep my composure. "No, I'm not. I don't know why you're doing this, but it needs to stop. You have to tell the truth." Alex scoffed, turning away from me. "I don't have to tell you anything. You're the one running away from your responsibilities." My frustration boiled over. "You won't even take a paternity test. That's all I'm asking for. If I'm the father, fine, I'll step up. But I'm not going to take the blame for something I didn't do." Alex spun around, her face contorted with rage. "You're just like everyone else, aren't you? Always looking for a way out. Well, guess what? You're not getting out of this one. Her words struck me like a physical blow, igniting a firestorm of anger and desperation inside me. Couldn't back down. Not now, not ever. I needed her to face the truth, to acknowledge the chaos she had unleashed in my life. It was as if she had already decided I was guilty, no matter what I said. Alex, this is insane. You're ruining my life. What do you get out of this? She glared at me, her jaw clenched, radiating defiance. You don't get it, do you? I don't care if you believe me. I don't care if anyone believes me. I know the truth, and that's all that matters. In that moment, it hit me. There was no reasoning with her. She was committed to this lie, and nothing I said would change her mind. After our explosive confrontation, I knew the situation wasn't going to magically fix itself. I tried everything. Reasoning with her, talking to my parents, even pleading with Jessica to believe me. But everything was falling apart around me. Desperation clawed at my insides. The only way to end this nightmare was to take legal action. The next day, I made an appointment with a lawyer who specialized in family law and paternity disputes. His name was Carl Stevens, a no-nonsense kind of guy. I laid everything bare. How Alex refused to take the paternity test, how my parents had turned against me, and how I was being accused of fathering a child that wasn't mine. Carl nodded, his expression serious. It's time we force her hand. If she won't agree to the test voluntarily, we'll take it to court. The law is on your side. For the first time in weeks, a flicker of hope ignited in my chest. I wasn't going to let Alex's lies destroy me any longer. Weeks later, after filing the necessary paperwork and enduring a grueling back and forth between our lawyers, Alex was finally legally obligated to take the paternity test. She fought it at first, but the court order was undeniable. She had no choice but to comply. The day of the test was charged with tension. We arrived at the clinic separately, both of us avoiding eye contact. The staff swabbed my cheek and took Alex's sample. I knew the truth, but anxiety twisted in my stomach like a tight knot. What if something went wrong? What if the test didn't clear my name? A week later, Carl called with the results. My heart raced as I listened, dread and anticipation coursing through me. You're not the father, he said. His voice steady but filled with weight. Relief flooded through me, crashing over my worries like a tidal wave. Finally, I had the proof I needed. I wasn't the father of Alex's baby, but even with the evidence in hand, I knew this was just the beginning. I drove straight to my parents' house that afternoon, the weight of the moment pressing heavily on my chest. I hadn't spoken to them since they'd kicked me out, and now, after being proven innocent, I wasn't sure how they would react. But I had to see them. I needed to confront them face to face. As I stepped into their house, they were seated in the living room. My dad glanced up from his newspaper, his expression unreadable, while my mom paused her knitting, her eyes narrowing. The air was thick with unspoken tension. I cleared my throat, forcing the words past the lump in my throat. I got the results. Standing in the doorway, I declared, I'm not the father. My mom's face crumpled instantly, tears flooding her eyes, while my dad looked stunned, as if the words had knocked the wind out of him. Are you sure? He asked, his voice trembling with disbelief. I pulled out the official papers from the clinic, thrusting them into his hands. Here's the proof. I told you from the beginning that I didn't do anything. Why didn't you believe me? My mom shot up from her seat, tears streaming down her face. She rushed toward me, trying to wrap me in a hug, but I stepped back, heart pounding. I'm so sorry, Liam, she sobbed. We were wrong. We should have trusted you. I didn't respond right away. The pain of their betrayal felt raw and jagged, a wound that refused to heal. They had turned their backs on me when I needed them the most. Now, after everything I had endured, I wasn't sure I could just forgive and forget. We want to make this right, my dad said, his voice thick with regret. We'll help you in any way we can. We'll even give you money if that's what it takes. Disgust washed over me at the offer. Money? As if that could somehow undo the damage they'd caused. It's not about money, I spat, my voice cold and sharp. It's about trust. You didn't believe me. You were ready to kick me out of your lives over a lie, without even giving me a chance to defend myself. My mom's sobs grew louder, but I couldn't bring myself to comfort her. The hurt ran too deep. I turned to leave, the papers still clutched in my dad's hands. Liam, please, my dad called after me, desperation lacing his voice. Don't go. We can fix this. I paused at the door, turning back to them one last time. I can't forgive you for what you did. Not now. With that, I walked out, feeling the weight of their betrayal lift slightly, though the scars it left behind were permanent. Word of the paternity test spread like wildfire. I told Jessica first, hoping this would be the turning point that would mend our fractured relationship. But even though she was relieved I wasn't the father, things between us remained strained. The trust had been shattered, and no amount of proof could shake the doubt that had settled in her mind. We decided to take a break from our relationship, a break that felt more like an inevitable end. I couldn't blame her. This whole situation had been hell, changing both of us in ways that felt irreversible. Just when I thought I could finally put this nightmare behind me, Alex struck again. Rumors began to swirl. People I hadn't spoken to in weeks started messaging me, asking about the paternity test. I quickly discovered why. Alex had been spreading poison, claiming I had somehow manipulated the results, alleging I'd paid off the clinic or tampered with the samples to get a false negative. First, I brushed it off as ridiculous. No one would believe her, right? But I was dead wrong. Mason called me one evening, his voice thick with confusion and frustration. Man, I've been hearing things. Alex is saying you faked the test results, he said, disbelief evident in his tone. I sighed, fatigue washing over me as I faced this new twist. Mason, you know me? I didn't fake anything. The results are real. I'm not the father. He hesitated, and I could hear the inner turmoil in his voice. I want to believe you, but Alex is my sister. She's convinced you did something shady. Are you seriously doubting me again? After everything I've already gone through, I couldn't believe this was happening. It's not that simple, Liam, Mason said, his voice strained and uncertain. She's my family, and what am I? I snapped, my anger boiling over. I've been your best friend for years, and you're going to believe her lies over me? Mason fell silent, the weight of his loyalty hanging heavily in the air. In that moment, I realized our friendship was damaged beyond repair. No matter what I said or did, Alex's lies had poisoned everything between us. The situation spiraled further out of control. Alex had spread her rumors so broadly that whispers followed me everywhere. Even people at work were starting to cast sidelong glances, wondering if I'd really faked the test, if I was hiding some sinister secret. The final blow landed when Jessica texted me out of the blue. We need to talk. My heart sank. I knew exactly what was coming. We met at the cafe, the same place where this whole nightmare had begun. Jessica sat across from me, her face a painful mix of sadness and resignation. I don't think we can keep doing this, she said, her voice soft yet firm. There's just too much doubt. I don't know if I can trust you anymore. My heart shattered. Jessica, I've told you everything. I've proven that I didn't do anything. She shook her head, tears spilling from her eyes. It's not just about the test, Liam. It's everything, the rumors, the way people talk. I can't live like this. I need to move on. The ground felt like it had opened beneath me. So that's it? After everything we've been through? She nodded, her expression full of regret and sorrow. I'm sorry. Watching her walk away from the cafe was like witnessing the final act of a tragic play. My relationship with Jessica was over, and it was all because of Alex's twisted lies. I was overwhelmed. The rumors, the lost friendships, the shattered relationships. It was suffocating. That night, a fire ignited within me. I was done being a victim. The next morning, I walked into Carl's office, determination in my steps. I want a restraining order, I said, my voice steady but fierce. I want Alex out of my life for good. Carl raised an eyebrow, surprise flickering across his face. Are you sure? That's a serious step. I'm sure, I replied, my jaw clenched. She's ruined my life, and I refuse to let her have any more control over me. We filed the paperwork that day. Weeks later, the restraining order was granted. Alex was now legally barred from contacting me, from spreading her lies, from doing anything that could further damage my life. But even with that piece of paper, I knew the scars remained. My relationship with my parents was shattered. They reached out, but I had cut them off completely. I couldn't forgive them for how they had abandoned me, for how easily they had believed Alex's deceit over their own son. And Mason, we stopped talking. Our friendship, once a fortress, had crumbled under the weight of betrayal and doubt. Shattered by the lies and distrust, I couldn't fully blame Mason for his doubts. It was Alex's doing, but the damage ran too deep to fix. I was alone now, but at least I had my freedom. I had severed the toxic ties that nearly destroyed me, and I was ready to rebuild my life, piece by piece. After cutting my parents off and obtaining the restraining order against Alex, I thought things might finally settle down. But I was dead wrong. My parents refused to accept that I didn't want them in my life anymore. They couldn't fathom that they had done anything wrong. Worse still, they seemed hell-bent on regaining control over me, even if it meant resorting to extreme measures. It started subtly, almost insidiously. My mom left voicemails dripping with false remorse, insisting they only wanted what was best for me. But beneath those hollow apologies lay a dark manipulation. She would say, "We raised you better than this," or "Family is everything. You're not yourself anymore." I deleted each message without responding, anger and frustration swirling in my gut. Then came the bombshell. A week later, my boss Frank called me into his office. He looked uneasy, shifting in his chair as if he had to deliver bad news. "Liam, your dad called this morning," he said. I stared at him, incredulous. "What? Why?" Frank hesitated before continuing. "He said he was worried about you, that you've been acting unstable lately. He asked if I'd noticed anything off with your work." My stomach dropped like a stone. They were trying to sabotage me at my job now? "Frank, I'm fine. I'm not unstable. My parents and I are having some family issues, but I swear it has nothing to do with my work." He nodded, but I could see the doubt creeping into his expression. "I'm not saying I believe him. I just thought you should know. They called a couple of weeks ago too. Your mom was concerned about you." I interrupted him, my pulse racing. "What did she say?" "She was worried about your mental state," Frank admitted, his tone cautious. "I told her the same thing I'm telling you now. There's nothing wrong with your performance here. But you know how these things go. If people start hearing things, they might get the wrong idea." I was seething. My own parents were trying to destroy my reputation. I felt trapped, like a puppet in their twisted game. No matter how hard I fought to distance myself, they found new ways to drag me back into their toxic web. "I'm really sorry, Frank," I said, forcing my voice to remain steady despite the storm raging inside me. "I'll make sure it doesn't happen again." But I knew it was too late for that. It wasn't just my job they were targeting. They had begun reaching out to my friends, whispering that I was mentally unwell and making irrational decisions by cutting them out of my life. One night, Mason called me, confusion etched in his voice. "Liam, I don't know what's going on, man," he said, concern lacing his words. I braced myself for the inevitable. "What did they tell you?" "It's not just Alex," Mason replied, hesitation in his tone. "Your parents called me too. They're worried about you. They say you're unstable." My heart raced, fury bubbling to the surface. "They're lying. They're the ones creating this mess." "Dude, I want to believe you, but they're my family too," Mason said, his voice wavering. "They sound so convinced. Are you seriously doubting me again?" My voice cracked with disbelief. "After everything I've been through?" "Liam, I'm just trying to understand," he replied, but his words felt like a betrayal. I slammed the phone down, anger coursing through me. It was happening again. Their lies and their manipulation suffocated me, and I was done being their pawn. "But your parents are saying some pretty wild stuff," Mason said, his voice tinged with concern. "They told me you've been having some sort of breakdown, that you're paranoid and not thinking clearly." I clenched my fists, fury surging through me like a wildfire. Mason, I'm fine. They're just furious that I'm finally standing up for myself and not letting them control me anymore. I don't know, man, Mason replied, hesitating. They're your parents. Why would they lie about that? Because they can't handle the truth. They'll do anything to paint me as the villain. I'm telling you, Mason, they're manipulating everyone around me. Mason fell silent for a moment, then sighed heavily. Look, I believe you, but they're making it really hard not to listen to them. I hung up, seething with rage. No matter how hard I fought to distance myself, they kept dragging people into their twisted narrative. They wouldn't stop until they had turned everyone in my life against me. The breaking point came when they filed a petition to have me declared mentally unstable in court. They claimed I was a danger to myself and others, that I couldn't make sound decisions. It was a desperate and malicious attempt to force me back under their control. Knowing I needed help, I stormed into Carl's office, my fists clenched at my sides. My parents are trying to have me declared mentally unstable. I spat, my voice trembling with anger. Carl shook his head in disbelief. They're really pulling out all the stops, aren't they? He said, leaning back in his chair. Don't worry, Liam. We'll fight this. They don't have a leg to stand on. The legal battle that followed was nothing short of brutal. My parents hired a ruthless lawyer and tried to paint me as a dangerous, unstable individual. They dug up every minor mistake I'd ever made, twisting them into damning evidence of my supposed instability. They even attempted to use the fact that I had cut off contact with them as proof that I was mentally unwell. But Carl was a bulldog, relentless in his pursuit of justice. He presented my side of the story with clarity and conviction, showing that my parents' claims were not just baseless but driven by their overwhelming need to control me. He highlighted the restraining order I had against Alex and the paternity test that proved I wasn't the father of her child. He laid bare the manipulative behavior my parents had displayed in their attempts to ruin my reputation. After weeks of grueling court sessions filled with emotional turmoil, the judge finally made a decision. The case was dismissed. Not only that, but the judge ordered my parents to pay my legal fees for wasting the court's time with their outrageous accusations. I walked out of that courtroom feeling like a warrior emerging from battle, victorious yet wounded. But just when I thought things couldn't get any worse, I stepped outside one morning to find my car completely trashed. The windows were shattered, the tires were slashed, and someone had spray-painted "liar" across the side in big, ugly letters. My heart raced with a mix of fear and fury. This was more than just vandalism. It was a declaration of war. They were escalating their game, and I realized this fight was far from over. The word "liar" was emblazoned across the hood of my car, stark and accusatory. I stood frozen, staring at the wreckage, my heart plummeting. I knew exactly who was responsible. It didn't take a genius to figure out that this was my parents' doing, or at the very least, someone they had manipulated into doing their dirty work. I reported the vandalism to the police, but deep down, I knew it wouldn't lead anywhere. There wasn't enough evidence to pin it on anyone, and my parents had become masters at covering their tracks. It felt like a brutal reminder that they wouldn't stop until every part of my life lay in ruins. Then, as if things couldn't get any more surreal, my parents sued me for emotional distress. They claimed that my decision to cut them out of my life had caused them unbearable suffering, demanding compensation for the pain I had supposedly inflicted on them. It was beyond ridiculous. I couldn't believe they had the audacity to drag me through the legal system again after everything they had already put me through. But Carl was resolute. This case is even weaker than the last one, he declared confidently. We'll crush them in court, and he was right. The judge saw through their transparent ploy to manipulate the system, dismissing the case almost immediately. Not only that, but my parents were once again ordered to pay my legal fees for wasting the court's time with their absurd accusations. It felt like a hollow victory, though. The damage they had done to my life couldn't be undone by a court ruling. But the final straw came when they attempted to organize a family reunion behind my back. I found out when I received a message from one of my cousins, asking if I was going to the big family gathering at my parents' house that weekend. Of course, I hadn't been invited. My parents were using the rest of the family as pawns, trying to corner me into reconciling with them. They thought that if they involved enough people, I'd have no choice but to come and make peace. Fuming, I called Carl again, desperation clawing at me. They're trying to force a family reunion, Carl. They think they can manipulate me into coming back. He sighed, frustration evident in his voice. It's time to take more drastic measures, Liam. We need to get a restraining order against your parents. At first, I hesitated. They were my parents after all, but as I reflected on everything they had done, trying to ruin my job, turning friends against me, dragging me into court, and now this, I realized I had no other choice. If I didn't take a stand now, they would never stop. We filed for the restraining order, and after weeks of grueling legal proceedings, it was granted. My parents were now officially barred from contacting me, directly or indirectly. If they dared to call me, email me, or reach out through anyone else, they would be in violation of the order. It was a bittersweet victory. I had won the legal battle, but at the cost of my family. I understood now that I could never have the relationship I once did with them, and that reality weighed heavily on my heart. But I was determined not to let their toxicity consume me any longer. A normal relationship with my parents felt utterly impossible. They had crossed too many lines and inflicted wounds too deep for any healing. There was no way back. In the weeks that followed, a sense of peace began to unfurl within me, something I hadn't felt in far too long. For the first time in months, I wasn't looking over my shoulder, bracing for the next emotional ambush. I was free from the suffocating grip of rumors, legal battles, and sabotage. I focused on rebuilding my life, step by determined step. I moved into a new apartment, a sanctuary far removed from the place that had morphed into a war zone of betrayal. I reconnected with a few loyal friends who had stood by me through the chaos, those who truly understood the storm I had weathered. I began attending therapy, forcing myself to confront the emotional scars my parents had left behind. Each session was a battlefield, peeling away layers of hurt and anger, exposing the raw vulnerability beneath. But with every difficult conversation, I grew more convinced that I had made the right choice. Cutting my parents out of my life had been one of the hardest decisions I'd ever faced, but it was absolutely necessary. I refused to let their toxicity poison my spirit any longer. Slowly, I began to carve out a new reality. I found a new job and surrounded myself with fresh faces. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, I started to reclaim control over my own life. The ache of losing my family lingered like a ghost, haunting me in quiet moments, but it no longer consumed me. I learned the brutal truth. Those who are meant to love you the most can also inflict the most profound pain. But I also discovered a fierce strength within me, the strength to walk away, to shield myself from the very people who had betrayed my trust. In the end, I found a hard-earned peace. Not because everything was perfect, but because I had seized control of my life from the ashes of betrayal. I had survived the storm and emerged, battered yet unbroken. I was finally free to move forward, liberated from the suffocating chains of my parents' manipulation. Despite all the pain, anger, and betrayal, I had uncovered something more precious than family: my true self.